The winter wind bit through Grace Camden's threadbare coat like wolves tearing at wounded prey, and she knew with absolute certainty that if she did not find shelter within the hour, the California mountains would claim her life before dawn broke over the Sierra Nevada range. She had been walking for 3 days since the stagecoach driver abandoned her on the trail, pocketing the last of her money and leaving her with nothing but a canvas bag containing 2 dresses and her mother's Bible. The year was 1875, and Grace had been traveling west from Philadelphia to meet a man she had agreed to marry through correspondence, a merchant in Sacramento who promised security and respectability. But fate had other plans, and now she found herself stumbling through snowdrifts outside a town the driver had called Truckee. Her lips blue and her fingers so numb she could no longer feel them inside her thin gloves. The landscape stretched white and merciless in every direction, pine trees heavy with snow creating dark shadows that seemed to reach for her like grasping hands. Her vision blurred and cleared in waves, and she knew these were the early signs of freezing to death. She had read about it once in a medical journal her father kept in his study, back when her father was still alive and she still had a home. Then, as if conjured by desperate prayer, she saw it. A thin column of smoke rising from behind a stand of trees, gray against the darkening sky. Grace forced her legs to move, each step an agony of cold and exhaustion, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her throat. She pushed through the snow, branches catching at her coat and hair, until she emerged into a clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood, golden light glowing from its windows like a promise of salvation. She stumbled toward the door, falling twice before she reached it, her knees sinking deep into the snow. With the last of her strength, she raised her fist and pounded on the heavy wooden door, 3 weak knocks that sounded impossibly loud in the mountain silence. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I need help." The door opened so quickly she nearly fell forward into the cabin. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she looked up into the face of a man who seemed carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding them. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. He wore simple clothes, wool pants and a flannel shirt, and she could feel the warmth radiating from the cabin behind him. "Good Lord," the man said, his voice rough from disuse but not unkind. "You are half frozen. Come inside quickly now." He did not wait for her response, simply wrapped one arm around her waist and half carried her into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind them. The warmth hit her like a physical force and she gasped, her body beginning to shake uncontrollably as the temperature change overwhelmed her system. "I am sorry," Grace managed through chattering teeth. "I only need shelter for the night. Please, I will not be any trouble. I can sleep by the door, I just need to be out of the cold." "You will do no such thing," the man said firmly. He guided her to a chair near the stone fireplace where flames crackled and danced, filling the room with blessed heat. "Sit here. Do not move." He disappeared into another room, and Grace sat trembling in the chair, looking around the cabin with dazed eyes. It was a single large room with a sleeping area in one corner, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove in another, and a sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs in the center. Everything was neat and clean, the mark of a man who took care with his surroundings. Animal furs covered the floor and dried herbs hung from the rafters. It was a bachelor's home, simple but comfortable. The man returned carrying several thick wool blankets. "We need to warm you slowly," he said, draping them around her shoulders. "Too fast and it could be dangerous. "What is your name?" "Grace Camden," she said, pulling the blankets tight around herself. The shaking had not stopped, and her teeth continued to chatter. "I am deeply grateful for your kindness, Mr. Samuel Wright," he said, "but you can call me Sam. Everyone does, though I do not see many people up here." He knelt in front of her, his eyes serious as they studied her face. "Miss Camden, I need to check your fingers and toes for frostbite. The cold can do permanent damage if we do not act quickly." Grace nodded, too exhausted and cold to be modest about such things. Her survival depended on this stranger's help, and she was in no position to refuse. Sam gently removed her soaked gloves, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle as he examined her hands. His frown deepened as he looked at her fingertips. "They are white, but I think we caught it in time," he said. "The toes worry me more. I am going to remove your boots." He worked efficiently, unlacing her worn boots and peeling off her wet stockings. Grace felt tears sting her eyes at the touch of his warm hands on her frozen feet, the contrast almost painful. Sam wrapped her feet in a soft cloth, rubbing them carefully to restore circulation. "You are lucky you found this place when you did," he said quietly. "Another hour and you would have lost fingers or toes, maybe worse. What in God's name are you doing out in these mountains alone in winter?" "It was not by choice," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The stage-coach driver, he took my money and left me on the trail. I have been walking for days." Sam's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his gray eyes. "Thieving bastard, pardon my language, but that is unforgivable. A woman alone in this weather, he could have killed you." "He might still have," Grace said, "if I had not found your cabin." "Well, you did find it, and you are safe now," Sam said firmly. He stood, moving to the kitchen area. "I am going to make you something warm to drink, hot tea with honey. It will help with the cold." Grace watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. He filled a kettle from a water barrel and set it on the stove, adding wood to keep the fire hot. Within minutes, he brought her a tin cup filled with steaming tea, the honey making it smell like summer despite the winter raging outside. "Drink slowly," he instructed. "Let your insides warm gradually." She sipped the tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest and belly. The shaking began to subside, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her eyelids heavy. Sam stood by the fire, his arms crossed as he watched her with concern. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Sacramento," Grace said. "I was supposed to marry a merchant there, a man named Henry Blackwell. We have been corresponding for 6 months, and he sent money for my passage west. But the driver took everything. You were traveling to marry a man you have never met." "I had few options," Grace said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "My father died 2 years ago, and without his income I could not maintain our home. I lost everything." Mr. Blackwell seemed kind in his letters, and marriage provides security for a woman alone. Sam nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That is the way of things, I suppose, though it seems a hard bargain marrying a stranger. What choice do women have?" Grace asked, a flash of her old spirit returning despite her exhaustion. "We cannot own property in most places, cannot work at most professions. Marriage is the only real security available to us." "Fair point," Sam said, "though I imagine there must be some women who make their own way." "Very few, and they are considered scandalous," Grace said. She took another sip of tea, feeling strength slowly returning to her limbs. "May I ask what you do here, Mr. Wright? This seems a lonely place for a single man." "I raise horses," Sam said. "There is good grazing in the valleys come summer, and I have a barn about 100 yards from here where I keep my stock. I sell them to ranchers and the army. It is a solitary life, but I prefer it that way. People are complicated, horses are honest. You have no family nearby." No one, Sam said simply. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week. I was raised by an uncle who taught me horses, and when he died 5 years ago, he left me this land. I have been here ever since. Grace heard the loneliness in his words, though he tried to hide it. She understood that feeling, the aching emptiness of having no one in the world who cared whether you lived or died. It was why she had agreed to marry Henry Blackwell, why she had traveled across a continent to wed a stranger. Anything was better than being completely alone. I am sorry for your loss, she said softly. It was a long time ago, Sam said, but his voice was gentle. I am sorry for yours as well. Losing your father must have been difficult. They sat in silence for a moment, two lonely souls sharing space in a warm cabin while winter raged outside. Grace felt her eyes growing heavy, the exhaustion finally overwhelming her now that she was safe and warm. You need rest, Sam said, noticing her drooping eyelids. You can take my bed. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bed, Grace protested, though the offer was almost painfully tempting. You can and you will, Sam said firmly. I have slept on worse than a fur by the fire, believe me. You need proper rest to recover from what you have been through. He helped her stand, supporting her weight as he guided her to the sleeping area. The bed was simple but sturdy, with a thick mattress stuffed with straw and several layers of quilts. Grace sank onto it with a sigh of relief, every muscle in her body crying out in gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You are saving my life, Mr. Wright. Just Sam, he said, pulling the quilts up around her, and I am only doing what any decent person would do. Now sleep. We will figure out what comes next in the morning. Grace wanted to respond, to tell him that in her experience, there were precious few decent people in the world and his kindness was a rare gift. But sleep claimed her before she could form the words, pulling her down into darkness so complete she could have been falling through the winter sky. She woke to the smell of cooking meat and fresh coffee, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows in bright golden shafts. For a moment, Grace could not remember where she was, her mind foggy with sleep. Then memory returned, the cold and the fear and the desperate knock on a stranger's door. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. Easy there, Sam's voice came from across the room. You are safe. It is morning and I am making breakfast. Grace pushed the quilts aside and stood, smoothing down her wrinkled dress. She felt stiff and sore, but the bone-deep cold was gone, replaced by a wonderful warmth. Her fingers and toes ached but functioned properly, and she sent up a silent prayer of thanks that she had not lost any to frostbite. How long did I sleep? She asked. Near about 12 hours, Sam said. He stood at the stove, turning strips of bacon in a cast iron pan. Your body needed it. Come, sit at the table. Breakfast is almost ready. Grace joined him at the table, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves past her shoulders. Her dress was wrinkled and stained from days of travel, and she had no doubt her face was dirty. But Sam did not seem to notice or care, simply set a plate in front of her heaped with bacon, fried eggs, and thick slices of bread. Eat, he said. You need your strength. The food was simple but delicious, and Grace ate with an appetite she had not felt in days. Sam sat across from her with his own plate, eating in silence while the morning light filled the cabin with warmth. Outside the windows, she could see endless white snow sparkling under a blue sky, the storm having passed in the night. The weather has cleared, Sam said, following her gaze. But there will be more storms. Winter in these mountains is not something to take lightly. I understand, Grace said, and I do not wish to impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary. If you could direct me to town, I will find a way to contact Mr. Blackwell and arrange for him to send money for my continued passage." Sam set down his fork, his gray eyes serious. "Town is 7 miles from here, and the road is buried under 3 feet of snow. Even with snowshoes, it would be a hard journey for someone who knows the way. For someone unfamiliar with these mountains, it could be deadly." "Then what do you suggest?" Grace asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "You stay here until the road's clear," Sam said simply. "Another week, maybe 2, and travel will be possible again. In the meantime, you will be warm and fed and safe. It is not ideal, I know, but it is the only sensible option." "I cannot ask you to house and feed me for 2 weeks," Grace protested. "That is too much of an imposition." "You are not asking, I am offering," Sam said. "And before you argue further, consider the alternative. You could try to make it to town and likely die in the attempt, or you could stay here where it is safe until conditions improve. To me, the choice seems clear." Grace knew he was right, though the thought of spending 2 weeks alone in a cabin with a strange man made her deeply uncomfortable. Not because she feared Sam would harm her. Something in his steady, honest gaze told her he was a man of honor. But propriety demanded she be concerned about her reputation, about what people would think if they knew she had stayed unchaperoned with a bachelor for weeks on end. Then again, she had nothing left to lose. Her reputation was already compromised by her circumstances, alone and penniless, traveling west to marry a stranger. What did it matter if she added another scandal to the list? "Very well," she said finally. "I accept your generous offer and I thank you for it, but I insist on earning my keep. I can cook and clean, mend clothes, whatever you need. I will not be a burden." "You are no burden," Sam said, "but if working makes you feel better about the arrangement, I will not stop you. The cabin could use a woman's touch, that much is certain." They spent the rest of that first full day settling into a comfortable routine. Grace cleaned the cabin thoroughly, sweeping the floors and washing the windows, organizing the shelves where Sam kept his supplies. She found a broom and dustpan in a corner, along with cleaning rags that had clearly not been used in some time. The work felt good, gave her purpose, and kept her mind occupied. Sam went out to tend his horses, returning several hours later with snow clinging to his coat and beard. Grace had started a stew for dinner, using supplies from his well-stocked pantry, and the cabin smelled of cooking meat and vegetables. Sam stopped in the doorway, surprise crossing his face. "Something smells wonderful," he said. "It is only stew," Grace said, stirring the pot. "Nothing fancy, but it should be filling." "I have been eating my own cooking for 5 years," Sam said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Anything made by someone else tastes like a feast to me." They ate dinner together as the sun set, painting the snow outside in shades of pink and gold. Sam told her about his horses, 12 in total, a mix of quarter horses and mustangs he had trained himself. His face lit up when he talked about them, his usual quiet demeanor giving way to genuine enthusiasm. "Would you like to see them tomorrow?" he asked. "If the weather holds, I can take you to the barn." "I would love that," Grace said, surprised by how much she meant it. She had always liked horses, though her experience with them was limited to occasional rides in the park back in Philadelphia. That night followed the same pattern as the first, with Sam insisting she take the bed while he slept by the fire. Grace protested less this time, too tired from the day's work to argue much. She lay in the darkness, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper against the cabin walls, and felt something she had not experienced in a very long time: peace. The next morning dawned cold and clear, and after breakfast, Sam kept his promise to show her the horses. He provided her with a thick coat that had belonged to his uncle, far too large but wonderfully warm, and led her through the snow to the barn. It was a sturdy structure, well built and well maintained, with a dozen stalls and a hayloft overhead. The horses were beautiful, sleek, and strong, their coats gleaming with health. Sam introduced her to each one, telling her their names and personalities. There was Thunder, a gray stallion with a proud bearing, and Whisper, a gentle mare who nuzzled Grace's hand looking for treats. There was Smoke and Ember, a matched pair of bays, and Arrow, a palomino with a white blaze down his face. "They are magnificent," Grace said, stroking Arrow's soft nose. The horse whickered softly, his dark eyes warm and intelligent. "They are good animals," Sam agreed. "Loyal and hardworking. I trust them more than most people I have met." Grace watched him work, mucking stalls and distributing hay and grain, his movements efficient and caring. He clearly loved these animals, treated them with respect and kindness. She found herself helping without being asked, hauling water and spreading fresh straw, falling into an easy rhythm with him. "You are not afraid of hard work," Sam observed. "I never had the luxury of being afraid of it," Grace said. "After my father died, I took in sewing to try to keep our house. I worked 12 hours a day sometimes, though it was never quite enough." "That must have been difficult," Sam said quietly. "It was," Grace admitted, "but it taught me that I am stronger than I thought. When you have to survive, you find reserves of strength you did not know existed." They worked together in comfortable silence, and Grace felt a strange contentment settle over her. There was something peaceful about the physical labor, the warm smell of hay and horses, the quiet company of a man who did not expect her to be anything other than herself. Over the following days, they fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Grace cooked and cleaned, managing the cabin with an efficiency that seemed to amaze Sam. He continued his work with the horses, but he also taught her things: how to split wood, how to recognize weather signs in the sky, how to set snares for rabbits. She learned that despite his quiet nature, Sam was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, sharing stories of their lives. Grace told him about Philadelphia, about her father's work as a printer and the comfortable life they had before his death. She spoke of her mother, who had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Grace was 10, leaving father and daughter alone together. Sam told her about growing up wild in these mountains, about his uncle who had been more father than relation, teaching him to track and hunt and train horses. He spoke of the loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed him, especially during the long winter nights, but also of the freedom he found in this solitary life. "You never want more?" Grace asked one evening. "A family, children, someone to share your life with?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I wanted those things once," he said finally. "There was a girl in town, years ago. I thought we might marry. But her father did not approve of a horse trader with no prospects, and he married her off to a banker from Sacramento. After that, I suppose I decided it was easier to be alone than to risk that kind of pain again." "I am sorry," Grace said softly. "It was a long time ago," Sam said. "What about you? Did you have anyone back east?" "No one who mattered," Grace said. "There were a few young men who showed interest, but when my father died and I lost everything, they disappeared remarkably quickly. I learned that affection often depends on circumstance." "Then they were fools," Sam said, his voice firm. "Any man would be lucky to have you." Grace felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, unused to such direct kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. As the days passed, Grace found herself thinking less about Henry Blackwell and her interrupted journey to Sacramento. The life she had been traveling toward seemed distant and unreal, like something that had happened to someone else. Here in this mountain cabin, with this quiet, kind man, she felt more at home than she had in years. She began to notice things about Sam that made her heart beat faster. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which happened more often as the days went by. The strength in his hands as he worked, capable and sure. The gentleness with which he treated his animals and her. The sound of his laughter, rare but warm, filling the cabin with light. Sam seemed to notice things about her as well. She would catch him watching her as she cooked, his expression soft and wondering. When they worked together, he found excuses to stand close, to brush against her hand, to help her with tasks she could have managed alone. The air between them grew charged with something unspoken, a tension that was not uncomfortable but rather thrilling. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, Grace was preparing dinner when she heard Sam come in from the barn. She turned to greet him and found him standing by the door, his coat covered in fresh snow, staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Do I have flour on my face?" "You are beautiful," Sam said quietly. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her. "I am sorry that was forward of me, but standing here seeing you in my home, it just struck me how beautiful you are. Not just your face, though that is certainly lovely, but the way you move, the way you have made this place feel like a home instead of just a cabin. The way you hum when you cook and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. Everything about you is beautiful, Grace Camden." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, though she could not have said if they were from joy or sorrow or simply overwhelming emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such honest tenderness. "Sam," she said softly, "I do not know what to say." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just in front of her. "Then do not say anything. Just let me say what has been building in my heart since you knocked on my door, half frozen and desperate. I know it has only been 2 weeks. I know you came here by accident, that you were heading somewhere else, to someone else. But Grace, in these 2 weeks, I have felt more alive than I have in 5 years of solitude. You have brought light and laughter and warmth into my life, and the thought of you leaving tears at my heart." "Sam, I do not have a choice," Grace said, though her voice shook. "I have nothing. No money, no prospects. Mr. Blackwell is expecting me. I gave him my word." "To hell with Blackwell," Sam said fiercely. "Pardon my language again, but I mean it. You do not know him. You owe him nothing. Stay here, Grace. Stay with me. Not as a guest, not as someone just sheltering from the cold. Stay as my wife. Let me give you the home and security you need, and let me have the companionship and love I have been missing." Grace stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rushing in her ears. "You are asking me to marry you." "I am," Sam said. "I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but out here we do not have the luxury of long courtships. When you know something is right, you take hold of it, and Grace, this feels right. You feel right. Tell me you do not feel it too, this connection between us." "I feel it," Grace admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I have felt it almost from the beginning. Sam, these 2 weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. When I think about leaving, about going to Sacramento and marrying a stranger, my heart breaks. But I also cannot be selfish. You are offering me security out of kindness, but what if you come to regret it? What if one day you look at me and see only the burden I have become?" "You could never be a burden," Sam said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his rough, warm hands. "Grace, I am not offering out of kindness alone, though God knows you deserve kindness. I am offering because I love you. I know that sounds impossible, loving someone after only 2 weeks. But I do. I love your strength and your courage. I love your laughter and your stubbornness. I love the way you have made my lonely cabin feel like home. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Grace felt the tears spill over, running hot down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think it was possible, but I do. I love you, Sam Wright." He leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. He tasted of coffee and winter air, and his beard was soft against her skin. The kiss felt like coming home, like finding something she had been searching for all her life without knowing it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Grace said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Sam. I will stay here with you and build a life in these mountains and love you for as long as we both shall live." "Thank God," Sam said, pulling her close and holding her tight. "Thank God you knocked on my door that night. Thank God for the storm that brought you to me." They stood holding each other as the sun set outside, painting the snow in shades of fire. The stew Grace had been cooking began to burn, filling the cabin with the smell of charred vegetables, but neither of them cared. They had found something far more important than dinner, something worth more than all the gold in California. They had found each other. The next morning, Sam insisted they go into town to make the marriage official. The roads were still difficult but passable, and he hitched up a sturdy sled pulled by Thunder and Whisper. They bundled themselves in furs and made the journey to Truckee, arriving in the small mountain town by mid-afternoon. Truckee was a rough place, still recovering from the floods that had devastated it years earlier, but it was growing, supported by the railroad and timber industries. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and a small church with a white steeple. Sam drove the sled directly to the church, helping Grace down with gentle hands. The minister was an older man named Reverend Thomas Clark, with kind eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis. He listened as Sam explained the situation, his expression growing warmer as the story unfolded. "Young man, I have been serving this community for 20 years, and I have learned that the heart knows its own mind far better than any schedule or propriety can dictate," Reverend Clark said. "If you two want to marry, I will happily perform the ceremony. Do you have witnesses?" "We can find some," Sam said. "No need," the Reverend said. "My wife and I will stand witness. Martha, come down here, dear. We have a wedding to perform." Martha Clark appeared from the rooms above the church, a plump woman with gray hair and a warm smile. She immediately took charge, insisting that Grace needed a proper wedding dress, or at least something better than her travel-stained gown. She disappeared and returned with a simple but lovely dress in pale blue, one of her daughters that would fit Grace well enough. "Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day," Martha said, helping Grace change in a small room off the main church. When Grace emerged, Sam's face transformed. He had never seen her in anything but the plain brown dress she had been wearing since her arrival, and now, in the blue gown with her dark hair brushed and pinned up properly, she took his breath away. "Grace," he said softly, "you look like an angel." "Hardly," Grace said with a shy smile. "But I am glad you think so." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood before the altar in the small church, sunlight streaming through the windows, and spoke the ancient words that would bind them together. Sam's voice was steady and sure as he repeated his vows, his gray eyes never leaving Grace's face. When it was her turn, Grace spoke clearly, meaning every word with her whole heart. "I, Grace Camden, take you, Samuel Wright, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Reverend Clark pronounced them man and wife, and Sam kissed his bride with a tenderness that made Martha Clark dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. They signed the marriage register, making everything legal and proper, and Sam paid the Reverend with coins from a leather pouch. "Now then," Martha Clark said briskly, "you will stay for supper. I insist. No newlyweds should start their married life without a proper celebration." The Clarks lived in modest rooms above the church, and Martha set a fine table despite the short notice. There was roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and even a pie made from preserved berries. They ate and talked, and Grace learned that the Clarks had been in Truckee since the town's founding, had weathered every hardship and stayed because they loved the mountains and the community they had helped build. "Marriage is not always easy," Reverend Clark said as they finished their meal. "There will be hard times, disagreements, struggles, but if you face them together with love and respect, you can weather any storm." "We will remember that," Sam said, squeezing Grace's hand under the table. They left as the sun was setting, the sled loaded with supplies Sam had purchased at the general store, as well as several wedding gifts from the Clarks. Preserves, candles, a beautiful quilt Martha had made. The journey back to the cabin seemed shorter than the journey into town, perhaps because Grace's heart felt so light she might have floated home without the sled. When they arrived at the cabin, Sam helped her down and then swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It is tradition," he said, his eyes sparkling with joy. "And I intend to honor every tradition I can think of when it comes to you, Grace Wright." Grace Wright. She was Grace Wright now, no longer Grace Camden. The name felt right, felt like it belonged to her in a way her maiden name never had. That night, they consummated their marriage, and Grace discovered that the physical act of love, which she had been taught to view with apprehension and duty, could be beautiful when shared with someone you truly loved. Sam was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, not his or hers but theirs, and Grace felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Sam said, his arms tightening around her. "And I will love you every day for the rest of my life. That is a promise." The winter passed more quickly after that, the days filled with work and laughter and growing love. Grace continued to manage the cabin, but now she also learned more about the horses, helping Sam with their care and training. She discovered she had a natural affinity for the animals, and they responded well to her gentle but firm handling. As the snow began to melt and spring approached, Sam began making plans for the future. "We could expand," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "There is good land to the west of here, and if we bought it, we could run more horses, maybe even start breeding them properly. It would mean hard work, but we could build something substantial, something to pass on to our children." "Children," Grace said softly. "Do you want children, Sam, with you?" "More than anything," he said, "but only when you are ready. There is no rush." As it turned out, nature had its own timeline. By the time the mountain passes fully opened and travel became easy again, Grace knew she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable. The morning sickness, the tenderness in her breasts, the way certain smells made her queasy. She had been about to tell Sam when he came home one afternoon with a serious expression. "There was a man in town asking about you," he said without preamble. "Henry Blackwell. He arrived last week, apparently concerned when you never showed up in Sacramento." Someone told him about the woman who married the horse trader, and he put two and two together. Grace felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "What did you tell him?" "I did not speak to him directly, but others told him the whole story. About how you were abandoned by the stage driver, how you nearly froze to death, how we married. He wants to speak with you, Grace. He is staying at the boarding house." "Do I have to?" Grace asked, though she knew the answer. Henry Blackwell deserved an explanation, deserved to hear from her own lips that she had married another man. "I think you should," Sam said gently. "Not because you owe him anything beyond common courtesy, but because it will give you closure. You can tell him yourself that you are happy here, that you have made your choice, and I will be right there with you." The next day, they returned to Truckee together, and Sam waited outside the boarding house while Grace went in to speak with Henry Blackwell. She found him in the small sitting room, a thin man with spectacles and thinning hair, nervously wringing his hands. "Miss Camden," he said, standing quickly when he saw her. "Or rather, Mrs. Wright, I suppose I should say. I am Henry Blackwell." "Mr. Blackwell," Grace said, sitting in the chair across from him. "I owe you an explanation and an apology." "You owe me nothing," Henry said, surprising her. "I heard what happened to you, how that driver abandoned you in the mountains. I am only grateful you survived. When you did not arrive in Sacramento, I feared the worst." "I am sorry I did not contact you," Grace said. "But by the time I could have, I was already married. Mr. Blackwell, I mean no disrespect, but I found something here I did not expect to find. I found love, real love with a good man. I hope you can understand." Henry was quiet for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "I can understand. Truth be told, Miss Camden, our arrangement was always more practical than romantic. I wanted a wife to help with my business and manage my home, and you needed security. But if you have found genuine affection, then I am happy for you. It is more than many people ever find." "Thank you," Grace said, relief flooding through her. "You are very kind to understand." "I am disappointed, certainly," Henry admitted, "but not heartbroken. Perhaps this is for the best for both of us. I will return to Sacramento and eventually find another arrangement, and you will be happy here in your mountains with your cowboy." They parted on good terms, and when Grace emerged from the boarding house, Sam was waiting with the sled, his expression anxious until he saw her smile. "It went well?" he asked. "It went fine," Grace said. He understood. "And Sam, I have something to tell you. I am carrying your child. We are going to have a baby." Sam's face transformed, joy lighting his features like sunshine breaking through clouds. He let out a whoop of happiness and picked her up, spinning her around right there in the muddy street while passers-by smiled at the obvious love between them. "A baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down and placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Grace, you have made me the happiest man alive." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Sam built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small horses into the headboard. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating each stitch with love. They converted a corner of the cabin into a nursery area, hanging curtains for privacy and painting the walls a cheerful yellow. As summer bloomed across the mountains, Sam purchased the additional land he had talked about, expanding their ranch. He hired 2 young men from town to help with the increased workload, brothers named Jake and Matthew Sullivan, who were hard workers and good company. With their help, the ranch began to thrive, and Sam's reputation as a horse trainer grew. Grace's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat made her uncomfortable, and the baby seemed determined to kick her ribs at every opportunity. Sam was endlessly solicitous, bringing her cool water, rubbing her swollen feet, reading to her in the evenings from the few books they owned. "You are going to spoil me," Grace said one evening as he carefully braided her long hair, something he had learned to do to help her stay cool. "That is the plan," Sam said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You are carrying our child, Grace. You deserve to be pampered." In late October, as the aspens turned gold and the first snows threatened, Grace went into labor. Sam rode to town and returned with Mrs. Martha Clark, who had delivered half the babies in Truckee County and exuded competent calm. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, their son was born. "A boy," Martha announced, placing the squalling infant on Grace's chest. "A fine, healthy boy with a good set of lungs." Grace looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt her heart expand with a love so intense it was almost painful. Sam knelt beside the bed, his eyes wet with tears as he looked at his wife and child. "He is perfect," Sam whispered. "Grace, you are amazing. Look at what you did. Look at our son." They named him Samuel James Wright, after his father and Grace's father, but called him Jamie from the start. He had Sam's gray eyes and Grace's dark hair, and from the beginning, he was curious and alert, always wanting to see and touch and explore everything around him. Parenthood transformed them both in ways they had not anticipated. Sam, who had lived alone for so long, proved to be a natural father, patient and playful with his son. Grace discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing the household and helping with the ranch while caring for an infant who seemed to never sleep. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary miracles of family life. Jamie took his first steps in the cabin, stumbling toward his father with determined concentration. He spoke his first word, horse, much to Sam's delight. He grew into a bright, active child who followed his father everywhere, learning about the animals and the land with eager fascination. When Jamie was 3, Grace became pregnant again, and this time she carried twin girls who arrived in a dramatic early morning birth that sent Sam into a panic and made Martha Clark laugh with delight. "Twins," she said, holding up first one baby and then the other. "Two beautiful little girls. Your family just doubled, Sam Wright." They named the twins Elizabeth Grace, called Ellie, and Margaret Rose, called Maggie. They had their mother's brown eyes and their father's strong features, and from the beginning, they were inseparable, communicating in their own special language that no one else could understand. The cabin expanded as the family grew, Sam adding rooms and a second floor with the help of the Sullivan brothers, who had become close friends over the years. The ranch continued to prosper, and they bought more land, building their holdings until the Wright Ranch became one of the most respected horse operations in the Sierra Nevada. But through all the growth and change, through the hard work and occasional setbacks, Sam and Grace never lost sight of what was most important, their love for each other. They still sat by the fire in the evenings, talking and dreaming. They still stole moments alone when they could, sneaking away to the barn or taking long rides through the mountains. They still looked at each other with wonder sometimes, amazed at the life they had built from a single desperate knock on a cabin door. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked one evening when the children were finally asleep, and they had a rare moment of quiet. "Taking in a frozen stranger who showed up at your door. Your life was peaceful before I arrived and complicated it." "Lonely," Sam corrected. "My life was lonely before you arrived and filled it with love. Grace, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, this life we have built together. I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the night Maggie and Ellie both had colic and screamed for 6 hours straight?" Grace asked with a smile. "Not even that," Sam said, pulling her close. though I admit that was a challenging evening. But I would go through 1,000 such nights for the joy of being your husband and their father. As the children grew, they each developed their own personalities. Jamie, the eldest, was serious and responsible, taking after his father in his love for horses and his quiet, steady nature. Ellie was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring places she should not go, while Maggie was gentler, preferring books and drawing to outdoor adventures. Grace homeschooled all three children, teaching them to read and write and cipher, instilling in them a love of learning that she had inherited from her father. Sam taught them about the land and the animals, about honor and hard work and keeping your word. Together, they raised children who were confident and capable, ready to face whatever challenges life might bring. When Jamie turned 16, he asked permission to work full-time on the ranch, and Sam agreed, though Grace insisted he continue his studies in the evenings. The Sullivan brothers had moved on years earlier, starting their own ranch further north, and Jamie quickly proved himself capable of handling their responsibilities and more. The twins, now 13, were inseparable still, but beginning to show interests in life beyond the ranch. Ellie talked about becoming a doctor, inspired by Doc Henderson in town, while Maggie dreamed of being a teacher. Grace encouraged both ambitions, determined that her daughters would have choices she had never had. One spring evening, when the aspens were just beginning to bud, and the last snow was melting from the mountains, Grace and Sam took a rare evening ride alone. They rode to a high meadow that overlooked their ranch, the cabin and barn and corrals spread out below them, smoke rising from the chimney where Ellie was supposed to be watching dinner. "Look at what we built," Sam said, his arm around Grace as they stood together on the ridge. From nothing but a cold night and a desperate knock on the door. "You built it," Grace said. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. You offered me a lifetime when I only asked for a single night." "We built it together," Sam corrected. Every board and nail, every fence post and corral rail, every moment of joy and struggle. Together, Grace. That is how we did it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Grace leaned into her husband's warmth, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her that terrible frozen night that she would find not just shelter but a home, not just survival but love, not just security but a family and a life beyond her wildest dreams, she would never have believed them. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, feeling her tremble against him. "That I am grateful," Grace said simply, "for every moment, good and bad, for the cold that drove me to your door, for your kindness in taking me in, for the love we found, for our children and our home and this life we share." "I am grateful for all of it, Sam." "As am I," Sam said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As am I, my love." The years continued to pass as they always do, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Jamie met a girl in town, a rancher's daughter named Sarah Winters, and they married when he turned 21, building a house on the far corner of the ranch land. Within a year, they presented Sam and Grace with their first grandchild, a squalling baby boy they named Thomas Samuel Wright. Grace held her grandson for the first time and felt time collapse, remembering the night she had held Jamie, marveling at how the circle continued, how life moved forward in its beautiful, inexorable way. Ellie did pursue medicine, studying with Doc Henderson, and then attending medical school in San Francisco, one of only a handful of women in her class. She returned to Truckee 5 years later as Dr. Elizabeth Wright, opening a practice that served the mountain communities with skill and compassion. Maggie became a teacher, taking over the one-room schoolhouse in Truckee and bringing her gentle, patient nature to educating the next generation of mountain children. She married a railroad engineer named David Foster, and they had 4 children who filled the family gatherings with laughter and chaos. Sam and Grace grew older together, their dark hair turning silver, their faces acquiring lines and weathering from a lifetime in the mountains. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by years of shared experiences and mutual respect. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration in town, the church hall decorated with ribbons and flowers. Reverend Clark, now ancient but still sharp, gave a toast praising the enduring love between Sam and Grace Wright, noting that their marriage was a testament to the power of faith and commitment. 25 years ago, I married 2 people who had known each other only 2 weeks, the Reverend said, his voice still strong despite his years. Many thought it would never last, that it was too hasty, too impulsive, but I saw something that day that convinced me otherwise. I saw 2 souls who recognized each other, who knew, somehow, that they belonged together. And these 25 years have proven that instinct correct. Sam and Grace Wright, you are an inspiration to us all. Grace looked at her husband across the crowded hall, at the man who had saved her life and given her everything she could have hoped for and more. Sam met her eyes and smiled, that same gentle smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago, and she felt her heart swell with love. That night, after all the guests had gone home and they were alone in their bedroom, Sam presented Grace with a gift, a simple gold locket on a delicate chain. "I cannot afford diamonds and rubies," he said, "but I wanted you to have something to mark this day. Open it." Inside the locket was a tiny painting, clearly Maggie's work, showing the cabin as it had looked that first winter, snow piled high and smoke rising from the chimney. On the opposite side was a more recent painting of the ranch as it now stood, with all the buildings and corrals and the big house they had built 5 years earlier. "Our journey," Sam said, "from that first night to now, both images precious to me because they represent the life we built together." "Sam, it is beautiful," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "I love it, I love you." "I love you too," Sam said. "More every day if such a thing is possible." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies as well as their own, able to bring each other pleasure with practiced ease. Afterward, Grace lay in Sam's arms and thought about the girl she had been 25 years ago, desperate and freezing, knocking on a stranger's door. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this fullness of joy. But somehow, through grace and chance and the kindness of a lonely cowboy, she had found it all. The years rolled on, bringing more grandchildren, 15 in total by the time Sam and Grace celebrated their 40th anniversary. The ranch continued to thrive, now run primarily by Jamie and his sons, with Sam serving as advisor and wise elder. Grace remained active in the community, helping Ellie at the medical practice and Maggie at the school, always ready with advice or assistance when needed. When Sam turned 65, he began to slow down, his joints stiffening from years of hard work in cold weather. Grace, a year younger, remained remarkably healthy, though she moved more carefully these days, mindful of brittle bones and fading eyesight. They spent more time sitting on the porch of the big house they had built, watching the ranch operate around them, content to observe rather than participate. "You think we did well?" Sam asked one evening as they sat in their rocking chairs, blankets over their laps despite the summer warmth. "In what way?" Grace asked. "In all ways," Sam said. As parents, as partners, as stewards of this land, did we do well? Grace looked out at the ranch, at the corrals full of healthy horses, at the house where Jamie's family lived, at the road leading to town where their daughters had made their marks on the world. She thought about their grandchildren, all of them strong and healthy and good-hearted, carrying forward the values she and Sam had instilled. "Yes," she said simply, "we did very well indeed." Sam reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of 40-plus years of practice. They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and felt at peace with the lives they had lived. Sam died on a cold November morning in his 80th year, his heart simply stopping as he slept. Grace woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, one hand still reaching toward her side of the bed. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, but she weathered it with the same strength that had carried her through all of life's challenges. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a tall pine tree where he had loved to sit and watch the horses graze. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect and affection Sam Wright had earned over his lifetime. Reverend Clark's grandson, now serving the church his grandfather had built, spoke eloquently about a life well lived and a love that had endured. Grace stood at the graveside surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, now numbering 23 souls, all of them here because she had knocked on a cabin door 55 years earlier, and a lonely cowboy had offered her not just shelter but a lifetime. She lived another 5 years, remaining sharp and active despite her advanced age. She spent her days with her family, teaching her great-grandchildren to read, sharing stories of the old days, and always talking about Sam, keeping his memory alive through her words. "Tell us again how you met Grandpa," the little ones would beg, and Grace would smile and begin the familiar story. "It was the coldest night of my life, and I was sure I was going to die out there in the snow. But then I saw smoke from his chimney and I knocked on his door, and he opened it and let me in. He saved my life that night, but more than that, he gave me a life worth living. He gave me love and family and a home. He gave me everything." Grace died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, on a spring morning when the aspens were budding and the mountains were shaking off winter. They buried her next to Sam, and on the double headstone, their children had carved, "Samuel and Grace Wright, united in life and death." They found each other in a winter storm and loved each other through all seasons. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, growing and evolving but always maintaining the core values Sam and Grace had established: hard work, honesty, respect for the land and animals, and above all, the importance of family and love. Visitors to the ranch, even 100 years later, could tour the original cabin, now preserved as a museum, and hear the story of the frozen woman who begged for shelter and the lonely cowboy who offered her a lifetime instead. It became a local legend, a testament to the idea that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead directly to the best, and that love can be found in the most unexpected places. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled through the mountains and snow piled high around the buildings, people would look at the old cabin and remember that once, long ago, a desperate knock on that door had changed 2 lives forever, creating a love story that would echo through the generations. A reminder that kindness and courage and an open heart can transform the world. The ranch still stood, solid and prosperous, a living legacy to the love between Sam and Grace Wright. The horses they had bred continued to be prized throughout the West, known for their strength and intelligence. The children they had raised had gone on to make their own marks on the world, and their descendants continued that tradition, always remembering the example set by their ancestors. In the main house, now home to Jamie's great-grandson, there was a portrait of Sam and Grace painted when they were in their 50s, still vital and strong. Sam stood behind Grace, his hands on her shoulders, both of them looking at the viewer with expressions of contentment and quiet joy. Below the portrait was a small plaque with words Grace had spoken in one of her last interviews for the County Historical Society. "I came to California seeking security through a marriage of convenience. Instead, I found a love beyond measure through an act of kindness." Sam Wright opened his door to a stranger and his heart to a friend, and in doing so, he showed me what it means to truly live. Our life together was not always easy, but it was always full of love. That is all anyone can ask for, and more than most people ever find. I was blessed beyond measure, and I am grateful for every day we shared. Those words became a guiding principle for the Wright family, a reminder that love and kindness matter more than wealth or status, that opening yourself to others can bring rewards beyond imagination, and that sometimes the most important decision you ever make happens in a single moment when you choose compassion over caution. The story of Sam and Grace spread beyond the family and the local community, eventually being written into books and told around campfires throughout the West. It became a symbol of frontier hospitality and enduring love, a reminder of a time when people helped each other because it was the right thing to do, when a man's word was his bond, and a handshake sealed a deal. But for those who knew the true story, who had heard it from Grace's own lips or had grown up with Sam's gentle wisdom, it was more than just a legend. It was a real love story between two real people who had faced real hardships and overcome them together. It was proof that even in the harshest environments, love could not only survive but thrive. That two people who started with nothing but determination and affection for each other could build something lasting and beautiful. The cabin where it all began still stood at the end of the long gravel road, maintained by the family as a reminder of their origins. Inside, the furniture was original, including the bed where Sam and Grace had slept, the table where they had shared countless meals, the fireplace where they had warmed themselves on cold nights. Visitors could see Grace's Bible, brought all the way from Philadelphia, and Sam's horse training tools, worn smooth by decades of use. But the most poignant artifact was a simple wooden sign hanging above the door, carved by Sam in his later years. This house was built on love. All are welcome here. Those words summed up everything Sam and Grace had believed, everything they had taught their children and grandchildren. Love was the foundation, the bedrock upon which everything else was built, and with that foundation secure, anything was possible. As the sun set over the Sierra Nevada mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold, the ranch settled into evening quiet. Horses moved peacefully in their corrals. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the various houses dotting the property. And somewhere, a child laughed as they played before dinner. It was a scene Sam and Grace would have recognized, would have felt at home in, even though more than a century had passed since that frozen woman knocked on that lonely cowboy's door. The specifics had changed, but the essence remained the same: family, love, hard work, and respect for the land and each other. And if you listened carefully on quiet nights, the old-timers would tell you, you could almost hear the echo of that original knock, the sound that had started it all, reverberating through time. 3 desperate raps on a wooden door, a plea for help from a stranger, and the footsteps of a kind man coming to answer. not knowing that in opening that door, he was opening his heart to a love that would last not just a lifetime but for generations beyond counting. That was the true legacy of Sam and Grace Wright. Not the land or the horses or the wealth they had accumulated, but the love they had shared and the example they had set. They had shown that it is possible to build something beautiful from the worst circumstances, that kindness to strangers can change the world, and that real love, the kind that lasts, is worth any sacrifice. Their story had a beginning in desperation and cold, a middle filled with work and joy and the raising of family, and an ending in peace and fulfillment. It was a complete story, with no loose ends or unresolved questions. Sam and Grace had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure as long as people valued courage, kindness, and commitment. The frozen woman had begged for shelter, and the lonely cowboy had offered a lifetime. Together, they had created something that transcended their individual lives, something that spoke to the best parts of human nature and the enduring power of love. Their story was closed, finished, complete in every way that mattered, but its impact would continue to ripple outward through time, touching lives not yet born and inspiring hearts not yet opened. And that, after all, is what true love does. It does not end when the lovers die. It continues in the children they raised, in the examples they set, in the stories people tell on cold winter nights when the wind howls and the fire crackles and someone asks, "Did I ever tell you about Sam and Grace Wright?" About how they met on the coldest night of the year and built a love that would last forever. The answer was always yes, and the story was always worth hearing again. A tale of hope and love and second chances that never grew old, never lost its power to move hearts and inspire dreams. It was a story with a perfect ending, because it was a story about perfect love, and that kind of love never truly ends at all.